Okay, so today's background and lighting is sponsored by Battleground City Council and the Battleground Police Department, who offered us a voucher for the night at the Best Western Motel in Battleground. So thank you to all three of you so very much, and this is going to be an interesting episode. Today we're going to use the imagination of, the evangelists and the scientists, and how people in the scientific community and how the collaboration of the creationist theories may all work together in this interesting theory of God's oceanic flora and fauna, which can be seen and spoken about between the second and third day or millennia or plus. So in previous videos, we have discussed that the entity that may be delivering the stories down to the humanoids may have seen this in the perspective of singular days, while God and its own entity may have done this in the blink of an eye. Now, if we have come to these conclusions, then we can agree that creationists and scientists can get along, because we are speaking of a perspective outside that of the earthly bounds. So once we can agree to meet at that level, then we can also agree that one day may also equal million or a millennia or plus. So this could go as far as a trillinia or a googolplexillion. We, in our impotent smallness to the nature of everything else, could not say or depict that the earthly day equates to realms outside of that. So, in Genesis 1:6, it speaks of God saying, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from water. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day." Now remember, we've also spoken about how the day has also been equated to the light that is good, which was separated from the shadow that is cast over the work which creates the darkness, which is equated to night. So we begin to consider the fact that there is no actual denotation between there being the cycle of night and the cycle of day, but that there is a morning and an evening for each one of these representations of day. As we continue on to Genesis 1:9, it says, "And God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let dry ground appear. And it was so." This could be a reference to the building of earth in itself and dry ground appearing as it is being formed. It could also be a relative notation to the bodies of water, or as one could perceive what is outside of earth, as in the galaxy, universe, and so forth. It has been also deemed to be a fluid-like fashion, when remembering with the fact that the speaker in itself presenting all of this to the writer, or to the interpreter and then to the writer, its presence may not necessarily be from its initial viewing from the earthly perspective, but from a perspective outside of earth and bringing the story to those on earth. Which also then brings in the continuation of this story, and God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And so again, we could be referring to that same notion. As we continue on, it says, "And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and fruit tree yielding fruit, as his kind, whose seed is in itself, upon the earth, and it was so. There are different interpretations. There are different, what is the correct word? Versions, of the same thing. Some are more elaborated into what their interpretation was. Some of it, when you read it, this particular interpretation does bring forth the words such as grass and herb yielding seed, where other versions refer to it as vegetation. Vegetation in the context when it is used as such, it could be referring to what is the floral and fauna, which does by most scientists appear to be the initial life forms on Earth, being that which were born in the water and helped produce the land. In some sense, this is similarly backed up as the story continues, because as the story continues, there had not yet been any plant life that had been sprouted on top of the soil or on top of the earth at this point, because yet the rain had not been cast down upon the earth, and the rivers that were below at this point had not yet watered anything else, but yet that the seas were teeming with life. And I would greatly be in agreement to the fact that this may be a notation to the floral and fauna that was first present on the earth prior to any mammalian fish or fowl and thus like. This could be incorrect, but if one wanted to find an even meeting space between a lot of different beliefs and cultures, if one were to consider that yes, we are speaking outside of the relative time and comprehension of those on the humanly plane and are willing to attempt to try and put our perspective in the comprehension of something outside of the earthly plane, bringing thusly the stories to the humans on earth, one might agree that 6 days, maybe 6 millennia, and by scientific value, if you wanted to find an equal relation between, say, creationists, scientists, evangelists, and some others, you could also be able to elaborate that God may have made earth in the 6 days and rested on the 7th, while also being able to describe and show a vast amount of evolution that happened in a very short amount of time, as to which the Bible does depict and does leave Easter eggs in how to hunt for some of this. Some of this would be by following other cultures or finding other texts that kind of elaborate to the evolution from the very initial stages of Earth prior to there being the humanoid-like living form on it by the 7th day-ish. So as we will continue, this may be the part again where in previous Genesis stories that we have talked about, where there may be a mother figure involved in all of this. Now, as we have spoken before, it does appear that this may be so, because it does also bring further in Genesis at this point in very vague description of there being another responsibility to the watering and creation of life on earth that was not necessarily handled yet, and it may be eliciting that that responsibility was to another deity. That other deity may have been God's wife at this point, because remember back in previous Genesis stories, we did discuss how God was he casted shadow over his work, and that he separated himself from the light and saw that the light was good. And before we got too far into Genesis, we did just initially kind of step over the floral and fauna concept to back up this light and dark, day and night definition and vocabulary concept, where we decided that night was God and the darkness was his shadow casted over his work, and the light that was good, that is depicted as day, we also depicted may very well be his significant other, i.e. his wife, or if he is gay, could be his gay partner. If he is non-denominational in sex, which we are not going to use the word non-binary because that means you have no purpose. So God has purpose. So he may be gay or straight or both. We don't know. It may be just a big puddly mush of everything. This part, we are just kind of going with our story so far that we have created, where the light, the day, is his wife, and the darkness or shadow, which is night, is himself, and that he had created two other lights, one greater and lesser light, the greater light to govern thy day, the light that is good, and the lesser light to govern thy night, which is thy darkness or God himself. And so therefore, you can also then, by reading into the organic flora and fauna concept, agree or disagree that God had one duty, his wife had another, and at this point, his wife had yet to water the earth from above and fully from below, so that God's work was kind of stationary at this point, but we do know that the waters was teeming with life. And the flora and fauna concept by vegetation, instead of utilizing grass and herb, which could also be construed as things like algae or kelp or seaweed, various other things that are teeming and are considered the vegetative life of the waters. We have yet to discuss the waters that have been separated or other factors between here and there, but these are just kind of key points to the story that we are creating, utilizing Genesis, and having a great time with developing good mental health. And we hope that you've had a wonderful night and look forward to your comments on this story, and have an interesting day. Bye-bye. Oh yes, this is DPA Bark Park. This report is by Kevin Quinn Fuller.